Yes, the 4 C's of addiction. They are compulsion, craving, consequences, and control. Sounds clinical, almost scientific. But this tidy little list has more holes in it than my liver used to get after a 12-day bender. And that's why doctors can't use the word addiction in an official medical diagnosis. In the DSM-5, which is the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, they came up with the term SUD, which stands for Substance Use Disorder, which differentiates from addiction in quite a few ways. Now, that difference in terms may sound like semantics to the rest of us, but in this video I'd like to explore why that distinction is important and why it isn't helpful to label someone an addict when it comes to recovery. So let's unpack this oddly unscientific approach to understanding the so-called addict and get to the bottom of this pseudoscience called the 4 C's of addiction. Now, I've checked several sources on the 4 C's, and they all sort of vary slightly, but they more or less go like this. So number 1, compulsion. A compulsive seeking marked by repetitive and often automatic engagement in the behavior despite conscious intentions not to. Number 2, craving. An intense urge to use the substance or engage in the behavior. Number 3, consequences. The continued use of alcohol or a substance even when it leads to destructive outcomes. And number 4, control loss, the inability to limit usage or stop once started. The more I stare at this ridiculous set of observations, the more arbitrary and redundant they seem to be. They sound like a description of every other human ego I've ever met. And if we're being honest, we'd have to admit that we've all exhibited some of these at one time, or even all at once. Does that make us monstrous addicts? If you strip away the moral language, the 4 C's of addiction are really just a specialized branch of OCD, an obsessive-compulsive loop aimed at avoiding discomfort through repetition. The only difference is that addiction's rituals usually involve substances, while OCD's rituals tend to be mental or behavioral. But at their core, both are about the same thing, an attempt to control what we can't bear to feel. So we attach ourselves to something: sex, gambling, shows, eating, friends, partners, shopping, religion, rituals, anything. We all cling to something, despite the way it may pin us down and quietly clip our wings. The 4 C's are a tautological treatment of a simple concept. I would reduce the first 2, craving and compulsion, to this: physical expression and experience of need. And the last 2, loss of control and continued use despite consequences, as simply inability to choose. But can we reduce these even further? If we look at physical expression and experience of need within the context of defining addiction, we could also reduce it to lack of choice against one's own biology. And thus we've reduced all 4 C's to one horrendous idea: that the person in question has no choice. It isn't a coincidence that this is the cornerstone descriptor in the dictionary definition of an addict, which goes like this: an addict is a person who has an inability to control when or how much of a mind-altering substance they use, or how often they engage in certain behaviors. The idea that addiction is a disease and that the addict has no choice is one of our most cherished beliefs. This concept was first introduced 100 years ago when alcoholics read the first step in the AA Big Book. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Now, this line may be helpful when confronted with denial, but it's also true that if you give something outside yourself power, especially something inanimate like alcohol, you relinquish the power of your own decisions. And so the object of your addiction will always be a master that you have to answer to. It is true that some addictions appear healthy, while others clearly are not. The drive to win a gold medal might be an obsessive need that strengthens the body, for example, while booze and drugs might be an obsessive need that destroys it. But the brain's dopamine reward system doesn't actually know the difference. It simply chases the effect, and it clings to the method that first got it there. This is why some high-performing athletes end up in depression after achieving a peak experience, like winning a championship or an Olympic medal. That's because it's very difficult to replicate that experience once their career is over. And this is partly why doctors are supposed to avoid using the word addiction as a diagnosis. The term doesn't belong exclusively to booze and drugs. It describes a universal human mechanism. So instead they use substance use disorder, a term that confines the problem to chemicals and quietly preserves the idea that the patient still has some volition in the matter, some faint thread of choice. The word addiction, by contrast, erases the chooser entirely. On page 486 of the DSM-5, we find an interesting passage within the introduction to the section on SUD. The word addiction has been used to refer to severe problems related to compulsive and habitual drug use, but because of its uncertain definition and potentially negative connotation, the term is not applied in DSM-5 as a diagnostic term. Instead, the more neutral term substance use disorder is used to describe the range of severity of maladaptive patterns of substance use. Any doctor worth their salt will only use the term addiction in a colloquial way, and they won't straddle you with the 4 C's. If a scientist makes that moralistic leap during a diagnosis, then you're not in good hands, and I would suggest seeking a second opinion. And while we're at it, let's tip over another sacred cow. The idea that some people are genetically predisposed to addiction. It sounds scientific, and there is some truth to it. There are studies showing that certain people have more sensitive dopamine systems or process substances differently. But here's the sleight of hand. We take those subtle brain differences and leap to the conclusion that some people are doomed to addiction because of their genes. That's not science. That's a narrative, and a moral one disguised in medical terms. There are no biomarkers for addiction, and no addiction gene has ever been discovered. Don't get me wrong. Is it tough to get clean? Hell yeah. Is it harder for some and less hard for others? Absolutely. Are there points of no return? Probably. But is choice completely absent from the so-called addict? I don't believe so. Let's run a little thought experiment. Suppose you are that irredeemable alcoholic who supposedly can't stop after just one. I invite you over to party with me. My fridge full of crispy lagers for us to session together. We have one. And now I ask you to stop. I bet you can't stop after just one, I'll say. Of course, you agree and continue drinking. Fair enough. But now I throw a $100 bill on the table. Does it change your mood? Maybe 100 isn't enough. What about 1,000? Cash. 5,000? 10K. It's all at your fingertips now. And look, suddenly the power of your decisions has returned. Kidding aside, you're probably struggling with a bad habit of your own. But don't throw the power of your decisions away just because there's a false god trying to keep you in line. You're so much more than that. I wrote the addiction fiction because I couldn't stand watching people accept that choice was off the table once addiction took hold. I lived the program, tested it on myself, shared it with others, and eventually we turned it into an app. The results have been staggering. Identifying the 4 C's won't help you get better. It only reinforces the idea that you're powerless to choose. In my view, the 4 C's amount to a kind of victim mentality, cloaked in the lexicon of neuroscience. I should also mention that I'm not coming from a purely analytical standpoint either. I was abused by an alcoholic father, lost both my parents to their addictions, 3 friends to overdoses, and 3 other friends committed suicide by hanging, where booze and drugs were central to their decisions. And that's not even the full story. I've had my own close calls along the way. I don't tell you this to scare you or to impress you, only to show you that I have as much reason as anyone to believe that addiction is real. And I can tell you, after having tried several methods of abstinence, the only thing that really stuck and elicited true change was the idea that there was nothing wrong with me in the first place. I highly recommend it as a starting point. Addiction has no power over you, but you do. So foster the real one. The real one is you. Because the sooner you embrace yourself, the sooner you'll be able to let go of whatever is holding you back.